Poverty and conflict in the world affects all of us. People flee to escape poverty, war, and persecution. Some end up in neighboring developing countries, increasing the pressure on them. Others reach the West and knock on the doors of Europe, America, and other developed nations. None of us can get away from it.
Well, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. If you can't measure the extent of need, you can't manage the extent of need.
What is it that we are trying to manage?
In the year 2000, to mark the new millennium, the UN called a special assembly, which was attended by more prime ministers and heads of state than have ever previously attended any UN meeting. And at that meeting, the leaders of the world committed themselves to work together and to mobilise the energy and capacity of the international community to meet a series of agreed Millennium Development Goals. The overarching goal was the halving of the proportion of people living in extreme poverty by 2015.
Poverty reduction has now become a focus of world effort. The new millennium saw all nations and international agencies agree that the first priority should be poverty reduction. There are 8 Millennium Development Goals. To monitor the achievement of these goals, there are 18 targets and 48 indicators. The information for these indicators clearly has to come from the countries themselves.
I suppose since the UN was set up, people have gone to the UN and made great speeches and signed up to great reforms, and then from all our countries, people go home and carry on as usual. This time we've got very specific targets, and we need, in every country, year on year, to be measuring progress, so that the people of the country can see whether their government is keeping the promise. Governments that are trying can learn from what's succeeding and what's not succeeding and what's succeeding in other countries, and the world can hold itself to account.
I would want to discuss poverty in a historical perspective in Kenya, because it's not that the issue is new. It's all too familiar. At independence, the things we wanted to do were to alleviate poverty. And we are saying 1972 and 1973, 3.7 million people considered poor. 1994, we are saying 11.5 million. Year 2001, 15 million. Out of the 30 million Kenyans, that was saying more than half are doing too badly.
Whatever we do, we are guided by figures. We get figures first, and then design a course of action, and then we monitor as we go along.
So we need better figures now. Everyone talks great statistics in international development as though we know exactly where everybody is and how they're doing, but often the figures are very old, inaccurate. We need to just sharpen up so that we can then, hold the world to account for what all our leaders agreed to at the UN conference.
We need statistics, if we reduce poverty in our countries at all stages. First of all, we need to know the magnitude of the problem in terms of poverty. Who are the poor people? How many are they? Where are they? And then when it comes to designing the strategies, we need information on what are the best options we have to actually fight the problem. And once you have the strategies in place and you're implementing, you must be able to track what your achievements are. You must be able to tell success from failure and be able to measure the achievements.
Heads of states of many countries are, like Kenya and Uganda, recognizing that if you can't measure policy effectiveness, then you can't manage development. They are making drastic reforms to ensure that the resources of governments and aid agencies are targeted at the poorest. In sub-Saharan Africa, the number of poor people is expected to grow from 300 million in 1999 to 345 million by 2015. To halve poverty by 2015, African economies will need to grow at 7% a year on average, more than twice as fast as the 3.1% growth in 2000. The new Partnership for Africa's Development is a pledge by African leaders, based on a common vision to place their countries on a path of sustainable growth and development.
The new Partnership for Africa's Development presents a series of challenges. They deal with issues of development. Development levels are different within countries and vastly different between countries. We need to know the extent of developmental needs and go back to the core contents of NEPAD, which deals with infrastructure, human capital formation, objectively also to deal with poverty eradication, and so on. And you can only do that by knowing exactly where these occur, where the needs are, and where the needs are greatest, in fact.
There are success stories which guide us in the drive to halve the numbers living in poverty by the year 2015.
The world's on track to achieve it. And it means 1 billion people making the journey out of extreme poverty between 1990 and 2015. And we're on track for that because there's been very big progress in China, which is obviously a very, very big country, 1 in 5 of humanity, and in other Asian countries. But Africa is not on track. Africa's on track to get poorer overall, though some countries in Africa are on track. Mozambique, Uganda, Tanzania, and so on. So it shows it can be done, but everyone's got to take it more seriously.
Uganda is one of Africa's success stories. It used measurement to manage its development programs. And the fact that the Uganda program was homegrown is a key factor in its success.
Because first of all, once you have something which is imposed, from somewhere else, people always see it as somebody else's thing. And they drag their feet when it comes to implementation because they're implementing something for somebody else. They don't really see it as if it's their own thing.
Around 1995, government realized the need to begin to put in place a program that would address the needs of the poor. So it came up with a Poverty Eradication Action Plan, actually much earlier than the PRSP was talked about internationally.
You can't get development if the lead isn't there locally. You need to put aid behind reformers, where you've got the people who have the will, who want to run their economy better, who want to provide services for their people, who want the economic growth that's really needed to reduce poverty.
A combination of political commitment and measuring development progress has been the key to many success stories. Some African leaders are convinced of this.
You can't plan anything without information. You need information to plan. It's obvious. I don't know who disputes that. What do they say? Do they say that you can plan without information?
We've seen with a number of countries that are poor and underdeveloped, one of the hardest challenges is, in fact, to take advantage of an opportunity to write their own poverty reduction strategy papers. They can't do so because they don't have ready access to statistics about their own countries. And I think that this places countries again at the whim and caprice of outside agencies. Governments need good statistics. The problem, however, is that we tend to see statistics as not immediately one of our priorities, and so we ignore that in favor of some other areas of spending. It's this that we need to get right because we need to manage the improvements going forward.
On the AIDS, for instance, now the prevalence rate is 5%. It has come down from 30% among adults. On the poverty, it has moved from 56% to 35%. On the infant mortality rate, it had gone from 122 per 1,000 to 81 per 1,000.
As President Museveni mentioned, one of Uganda's major successes has been reversing the trend in HIV prevalence. Uganda's policymakers have done this by following a clear process of diagnosing the problems, setting the goals and targets, and using indicators and statistics to measure the effectiveness of its policies.
Uganda went through many years of turmoil, and when the new government of President Museveni came in, one of the first things that was done in order to address a very pathetic situation of a dilapidated health service, a broken down health service, a looted infrastructure. One of the first steps was to establish a commission of inquiry into the health services, which deliberated for about 6 months and made some recommendations. They went all over the country and picked up evidence from the entire population and from the medical profession and from all other stakeholders, including civil society.
3 basic steps. You analyze the problem or the issue, you choose your objectives, and then you set strategies and your targets, and then you organize a framework to implement, to coordinate, to monitor and evaluate your plans. Each of these stages requires information.
I think statistics actually should be the eyes and the ears of the policymakers. If we are to really have effective poverty reduction, we need information at all levels. First of all, we need information for identifying how big the problem is in terms of poverty. We need information to tell us how to design the strategies. And then we need to monitor achievements. We must be able to tell success from failures.
Measuring and monitoring achievement requires indicators, which have been widely agreed to in a consultative process, that this is how progress will be measured. Selecting the kinds of indicators to use will depend on what it is you're trying to monitor. And there are 3 or 4 basic types of indicators. Firstly, the inputs. These are mainly money or resources that you put into a program. Secondly, the outputs. Goods and services produced, such as the number of houses built. Then there are outcomes and impacts, something that is a representation of well-being, such as healthier families or quality of life. To monitor the effectiveness of the programs, which will improve the lives of the poor, we need to monitor inputs and outputs to get rapid feedback on the effectiveness of policies. These generally rely on administrative records from ministries.
Really, every program has got its targets and its indicators, process indicators, input indicators, and these are the reports which they give to us every quarter and every year. So I would say that in the way in which health services are delivered in this country, information is at the root of everything that we do. Every program has got its targets, it's got its policies, it's got its goals, it has got its mission, it's got its strategies, then it has got its targets, and it has got its monitoring indicators. All the programs have got that, and it is against those that resources are allocated, and it's against those that performance is evaluated.
There is a marked change in the way donors are supporting poor countries. They are moving away from simply funding projects and specific programs to giving governments direct support to their budgets. But in order to measure aid effectiveness, to see if the money is being well spent, donors will rely much more on indicators in the future.
Donors are now recognising the need to buy into countries' own national poverty reduction strategies and other national development plans. In DFID, a lot of thought is being given to how the indicators and monitoring systems being used by national governments to monitor their own achievements can also be used to monitor our programmes and policies.
Well, I think donors, like decision makers, need a sound basis of funding. It's best that donors and decision makers have access to exactly the same information. I don't know how donors can arrive at rational decisions without statistics available. When we met in January, the President said, now after 8 years, where are we? Give us the tools to plot that point. We might need a very sharp pencil, but help us sharpen it. Politics is my work. I like good news. I like good news that I can tell people about. I'd like to be able to say we are now at full employment, that our economy is growing at 15% a year. I'd like those kinds of things. But please don't give me what I like, give me what I need, because part of what I need to do is to help deliver democracy to people who've waited a long time for it to touch their lives.
We need to give leaders the information they need rather than the information they want. To do this, indicators have to use reliable statistics to measure progress, but statistical systems are often inadequate.
My experience is that statisticians have a tendency of talking to themselves in mystifying ways. They tend to do this with a clock that's 10 times slower than the reality. And they tend to come up with answers that fail to answer that reality. It's not just statisticians, it's all manner of professionals. But it's because we aren't properly advised, properly informed, that I think policymakers, decision makers are placed in this unenviable position.
A paradox, virtually in every African country, I don't know about South Africa, where you have oversupply of some types of data, which many people don't use, and you have a shortage of the data which are required. Okay? More or less the case of what the statistician general told us. The president says, well, where is the information to inform what is happening? So the data is there, but it is not the data the users want. So you are really not relevant. And to the extent that you are not relevant, to that extent you become extinct. So it is in the interests of the statisticians to make sure that their profession remains relevant and alive by dialoguing with users of information and making sure that the right products are produced and delivered in time.
Statistics are expensive to collect. They have to be funded, and their use must be carefully planned for. How can statisticians give the users what they need?
We have mountains or oceans of data in many African countries which have not been processed, let alone analyzed. The statisticians don't know that there's a difference between data and information. And actually what happens a lot of the time is that statisticians provide data when actually what is required is information. And you can define data as low-level information, which must undergo a process that adds the value to the data to turn it into information, usable information, especially policy-related information. You write a report, 50 pages, of which 40 pages are statistical tables, and only 10 pages are text. And you send it to the ministry. These guys look at the table and say, well, nothing here for me. Water everywhere, but no water to drink. You know, we have masses of data all over the place. But you need to extract drops of information from the masses of data.
There are ways in which oceans can be converted to droplets or rainbows by use of imaginative technology. The same data used for monitoring poverty can be used with a census to produce poverty maps, which can easily be understood by the decision makers and the public.
The minister said if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So we use poverty profiles to yield information on the location and spatial attributes of poverty, the extent, depth, and severity of poverty. How deep is the poverty gap? How many people are poor within an area? Is it just a case of poor people or poor areas? When we combine poverty information with maps, we use the power of maps to represent and communicate information. They help us to improve communication about poverty conditions because even non-specialists understand maps.
Because democracy must bring tangible improvements in the lives of people. But decision makers can only do that if they're well informed about the occurrence of poverty, both geographically and in intensity.
It's not only important for governments to understand about the occurrence of poverty, but it is important for democracy to inform the public of the situation and get their active participation.
We have the elite who can have these, big documents which are a bit technical. Then you have the other part of the general public. They can access the documentation. But in our case, what we've done is to come out with simpler versions of the bigger technical documents for them to really be able to access the information. And in this case, we usually use more visuals than words.
So basically, we're saying, let's have the right information and let's disseminate that information. And what we do is whenever we produce a very, very complicated looking report, then we produce what we call popular versions, like this. So you have cartoons carrying messages in simple language, in English and in Kiswahili.
To the people who produce statistics, it is to either anticipate or actually go out and find what type of statistics people want, so that your statistical production should be demand-driven.
The expenditure on statistics needs much greater priority than it's received to date, but there also needs to be communication with people in countries.
Agencies that have not as yet seen the unfolding of the importance of statistics are doomed. And they will not sustain and support democracy. And democracy will not sustain in those areas where information doesn't play a great part. We've seen in the 1990s this window opening wider, a window of opportunity for information. It started in the 70s, got quite emphatic around the 80s. It's opening wider for the third world in the 90s. I hazard that by 2015, this window will have shut for information. If we don't grasp that opportunity to jump in as statisticians to inform development processes, then that window will shut.
Statistical investment is essential if we are to really target resources and ensure our poverty programs are effective. We need to design monitoring systems to provide feedback on effectiveness of our policies quickly, not 5 years down the line. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Statisticians will have to give democracy what it needs, not what it wants. But those statisticians will have to become much better at giving us droplets of information if they are to succeed. This means that statistics and monitoring systems have to be included in all programs. And strengthening those systems has to be one of the costs of achieving the Millennium Development Goals.
What I hope you can do is tie down in the hearts of the people of the world a commitment to this objective, and then get all the international machinery locked onto it. We can build an international system where everyone's committed, where we're measuring progress every year, but we've never before had such international agreement on what our objectives are. And I think measuring our progress is part of keeping everyone to the objective. So getting better statistics sounds dry, but it's actually essential. So we've got a system that's really transparent, and the people of the world can insist that whoever's in power, that we all stick to it.
The strategy of Uganda government has been to release the energy of the people by removing the obstacles in their path.
You'd want to have consultations such that whatever you're trying to do to tackle poverty is purely people-driven.
We should find a way of tapping into the rich information of our citizens.
Understanding realities is very, very important and the key to the process.
I am saying development is people-centered. People are both the key actors and the principal beneficiaries of development. And poverty is about people. Poverty doesn't only take place if the people become fully involved.